Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Haven't heard anybody say you can't see me. So anyway, my name's Sheri Crabtree. I've talked to a lot of you all ahead of time. I'm with Kentucky State University. I'm a horticulture research and extension associate with the land grant program there. And we're going to talk about pawpaws. So I think a lot of you are already familiar with pawpaws, but those of you that aren't, the scientific name is Asimina triloba. They're a member of the custard apple family. So I think a lot of you there can grow cherimoya, other members of the custard apple family. Obviously, custard apple, cherimoya, soursop, adamoya, guanabana, all the annona species. So annona is kind of a cousin to the pawpaw, to Asimina. There are other Asimina species that grow in the southern US, mostly in Florida. So there's some other shrubby Asimina species. They're mostly limited to Florida. Some of them go up into Georgia and South Carolina, but those are don't have good fruit quality. They're just kind of shrubs and have small fruit, seedy fruit that doesn't have a very good flavor. So pawpaw is really the only temperate member of the family. The rest of the family is all tropical and subtropical. So that's what makes it unique. It's this tropical tasting, tropical appearing fruit that can be grown farther north in areas where we can't normally grow tropical fruit. So it's a pretty slow growing, medium-sized tree, has kind of a pyramidal growth habit in full sun. The fruit are in clusters on the tree, usually 2 to 5 fruit. Sometimes you'll see single fruit, sometimes we'll see huge clusters of like 8 or 9 fruit. But most commonly you'll see 2 to 5 fruit per cluster. And the fruit of these improved cultivars is a half a pound to a pound in size on average. So it can get fairly large. Some people that are more used to seeing the wild fruit, they'll be like a ping pong ball size, but improved cultivars get quite a bit larger. So the flavor, really pawpaw has its own unique flavor, but people who haven't tasted it before, we compare it to a blend of mango and banana. Different varieties have different undertones to them. So you will taste some pineapple flavors, coconut, caramel, vanilla, melon, different flavors like that as undertones. The texture is kind of a creamy, ripe avocado-like texture. And it is nutritious, high in lots of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. So pawpaw flowers in April and May in Kentucky, right after redbuds and dogwoods. I'm not sure how numerous those are there, but that's kind of the benchmark here. Is soon after the redbud and dogwood trees stop blooming, pawpaws start. It'll be a little bit earlier than that in warmer areas, so it may be earlier for you all in California, maybe more like early April, somewhere in there. So you do need at least 2 trees for cross-pollination. They're not self-fertile, they do need to cross-pollinate, but there are not separate male and female trees. It's male and female parts on the same tree and the same flower. They just need, they're just not self-fertile. You just need 2 for cross-pollination. Although we've recently found, a graduate student looked at this and found that some pawpaw trees are somewhat self-fruitful. They don't set very many fruit. You might have 2 or 3 fruit on a tree that was self-pollinated. So they are not very self-fruitful. And pawpaws are pollinated by flies and beetles. They're not pollinated by bees, like most of the crops that we work with the most. You can hand pollinate to improve fruit set, but you don't have to. I know cherimoya, you pretty much have to hand pollinate. Pawpaw, you don't, although you can if you want to get higher fruit set. And one thing about pawpaw, you see the lower right-hand corner, developing fruit, an open flower, and at the bottom of the picture, a flower bud that hasn't opened yet, all at the same time on the same tree. So it blooms over an extended period of time instead of a lot of fruit trees, peaches and apples generally come into full bloom all at the same time. Well, different varieties at different times. So a single tree will be in full bloom and done within a few days or a week at the most. Pawpaw flowers over about a month-long period on a single tree. So you see flowers and fruit at all different stages on the tree at once, which is good for us where we get frost and freeze events because that will help help it escape a complete crop loss, usually from frost and freezes. Pawpaw is a good landscape tree. It has these maroon colored kind of bell-shaped flowers. Attracts zebra swallowtail butterfly, which I'll mention, but you would not be likely to see that, unfortunately, there in San Diego because it has an exclusive relationship with pawpaw. Pawpaw is the only plant that zebra swallowtails feed on. So they're really native to the eastern US where pawpaws are native. So unless you brought them in, you would not be likely to see them there. They have a really nice gold yellow fall color in the fall. And you see kind of the tropical, the large drooping leaves, almost a tropical appearance to them. So in this map you see on the left is the native range of pawpaw. This is where you'll find them in the wild. So kind of the Mid-South, Midwest, Appalachian regions, up into southern Michigan, even into southern Ontario, Canada, and down into eastern Texas, northern Florida. However, that's not the only place they can be grown. On the right, you see most of the country, pawpaw can be grown, except the very farthest north and very farthest south where they don't get enough chill hours. So USDA growing zones 5 through 9 is what they're generally recommended for. And somebody asked us before we started. Unfortunately, we don't know yet exactly how many chill hours pawpaws need. And I'm sure they vary by cultivar, just like other fruit trees that we know about. It's usually reported that they need about 400 chill hours, but I think that at least some varieties are lower than that. I know of people that have fruiting trees in Los Angeles and south of Los Angeles. Not sure about San Diego. I know somebody said they had a tree growing that hadn't fruited yet. But anyway, at least in Los Angeles and Anaheim area, there are pawpaws growing and fruiting. So some are probably lower, more in the 150 to 200 hours. And they are cold hardy to about 25 below Fahrenheit. So they can be grown in northern areas, just not like up into North Dakota and Minnesota. So pawpaw being a native plant, there's a lot of history with pawpaw in the US. The first written record that we have of pawpaw is Hernando de Soto, that was an early explorer of the Americas, found that Native Americans were growing and eating pawpaws in the Mississippi River Valley. So Native Americans were responsible for a lot of the spread of pawpaws. You see these little, on the native range maps, some little colonies in New York and farther north that are somewhat isolated, were probably spread by Native Americans, planted. Lewis and Clark, who we know, explored out west, they went out to Oregon. On their return trip from Oregon, they were in Missouri, and they ran out of food in Missouri. And they found pawpaws growing wild. And Lewis and Clark recorded in their journal that pawpaws actually saved them from starvation, because that was what they lived on for days, was pawpaw fruit. And we know that George Washington, it's reported that his favorite dessert was chilled pawpaw fruit. Thomas Jefferson, we know, is a horticulturist at heart, and we have letters of Thomas Jefferson sending pawpaw seeds to friends in France. So Thomas Jefferson probably introduced pawpaws to Europe, as far as we know, was the first to do that. Daniel Boone and Mark Twain were also pawpaw fans. So lots of kind of American history. And we were talking about sun versus shade. This is how pawpaws usually grow in the wild in the eastern US. They're usually found in the understory of hardwood forests, and often along rivers and creeks, kind of along river banks, a little bit up on the hillsides from rivers, along creeks. They spread by root suckering. So they form these big patches in the woods that are all spread by root suckers. You may have heard there's a folk song, Way Down Yonder in the Pawpaw Patch. So they form these big patches or big groves in the wild. But these wild patches, a lot of times they do not produce a lot of fruit. And that's for a few reasons. One, because of being in the shade, they don't produce a lot of fruit in the shade. And we're saying the kind of genetically or naturally, their method of propagation is sending up all these root suckers. So there isn't a lot of imperative for the tree to produce a lot of fruit in the wild in the shade. So they don't produce a lot of fruit in the shade. They just don't get enough photosynthetic energy from the sun. And also remember, they have to cross-pollinate to set fruit. So even though it may look like there's a lot of pawpaw trees in that picture, if they're all from one root system, they're all one genotype, right? So there's not a genetically different tree in that patch to cross-pollinate with. There may also not be many pollinators in these wild patches. And sometimes these wild seedlings are not of very good quality. You can find good wild pawpaw fruit, but sometimes they're small or seedy and have off flavors to them. So for moving pawpaw from kind of this wild plant to a domesticated plant, back in 1916, so over 100 years ago, the American Genetics Association had a contest for best pawpaw. And they predicted at that time that with intelligent breeding that a commercial industry would begin with pawpaw. So obviously we know a large scale, at least commercial industry did not develop. So you're not, it's bigger than it was before. There are more commercial pawpaw growers than there were 30 years ago, but it's not a huge nationwide scale. You're not going to find pawpaw fruit in Whole Foods or Publix or Ralph's or whatever your big grocery stores are. And the main reason for this is probably the rapid perishability of the fruit. So fruit, when they're ripe, they're soft, they don't ship well, they don't store well. So it's difficult to store it and have it travel long distances. So that's one of the big problems with pawpaw fruit, growing it on a commercial scale. So unfortunately, a lot of the cultivars that were found from that contest, the American Genetics Association contest, were lost over the years. But in the 70s and 80s, there was a resurgence in interest in pawpaw. The Northern Nut Growers Association became interested in pawpaw. Then the Pawpaw Foundation was founded in 1988 by Neil Peterson, who is a pawpaw breeder. Then the Ohio Pawpaw Festival started in 1999. And if you're ever out in Ohio in about second or third week of September, they have this huge pawpaw festival there with all kinds of pawpaw beer, pawpaw foods, fruit to eat, things like that. And then the North American Pawpaw Growers Association began in 2000. So that's when kind of this increase in interest in pawpaws began. So here at KSU, we have been doing research on pawpaws since 1990, and we're actually the only full-time pawpaw research program in the world. So there are other universities, other organizations doing some research with pawpaw, but we're the only ones that have a program dedicated just to pawpaw. And we are designated as a satellite site of the USDA National Clonal Germplasm Repository for Asimina species. So we have this genetically diverse collection of trees from all around the native range and as many different cultivars as we can get. So the main goals of our program are, again, preserving and evaluating the genetic diversity of pawpaw. We're also doing a lot of breeding to develop improved cultivars. We develop orchard management recommendations, pest control recommendations for growers and work with growers. And we assist farmers anywhere from large-scale producers, commercial producers, down to just backyard fruit growers and enthusiasts with pawpaw production. And we've done some work developing recipes and value-added products and storage, post-harvest storage methods. So for planting pawpaw trees, I left this first point in just because it's from a past slide, but in San Diego, you're not gonna have a problem with frost, but in case you ever move somewhere where you get colder temperatures, you do wanna plant them on higher ground to avoid low-lying areas or frost pockets, because cold air is heavier or denser, of course, so it pools in low areas. And low areas, you see this picture of the orchard, that low-lying area can be a couple of degrees colder than an area higher up on the hillside. So, and you will see a difference. You'll see if we have a spring freeze, you'll see fruit in the higher areas of the orchard and no fruit in the low areas of the orchard. Pawpaws prefer a deep, fertile soil with a lot of organic matter that will hold some moisture but is well drained. They don't like standing water or soggy soil. pH slightly acid to neutral. but they are adaptable to different soil types. You can grow them if you have some clay, if you have some sand. They can be grown in those conditions. This is just kind of their ideal preference. Pawpaws are fairly low maintenance. There's not a lot of insect or disease issues, which we'll look at in a minute. The main two things are weed control and irrigation. They do like, even though they like a well-drained soil, they like to be consistently moist. So you do need irrigation or to water your trees regularly, especially in drier areas like you all are in. And weed control, they don't compete well with a lot of vegetation right around the tree. So you want to, you know, whether you're just hand pulling or hoeing weeds or in orchards, have weed control measures. You can use wood chip mulch, straw for mulch to help keep weeds down and help preserve moisture in the soil too. So field planting pawpaw, we recommend 8 to 10 feet between trees. If you're planting them in your yard and it's not in rows like an orchard, they could be farther apart than that, but you don't want to go any farther than 30 feet apart, or you may begin to see problems with pollination farther apart than that. So the trees are pretty small. They usually stay, you know, 20 feet, 25 feet tall at the most, but it's easy to prune them to keep them a little bit smaller if you want to keep them shorter to be easier to harvest from. So again, like we showed the picture of the wild patch that's in the shade. Pawpaws will grow in the shade and they will produce some fruit in the shade, but you get higher yields in full sun. And again, the grass and weed control and irrigation are the main things, especially with young trees, newly planted trees. You want to make sure that you've got consistent irrigation. So California, we talked about this a little bit. Chill hours that we generally say they need about 400, but I've heard of them growing and fruiting enough places that get 150, 200 hours that I think it's likely lower than that. And most likely there are lower chill and higher chill varieties that we're currently doing research on. So hopefully we'll have some definite recommendations on that in the next few years. If you have sandy or clay soils, they may need to be amended with some organic matter. And like we were saying earlier, hot, dry areas may benefit from part shade, especially afternoon shade, to help them not get so stressed from the heat of the sun. And I know there's some of you all that have them in San Diego. I know there are some at Fullerton Arboretum. I know that's a little distance from you all, but that still is relatively far south in Southern California, and they are producing fruit there. So if you want to go, if you're up there and you want to check out some pawpaw trees, and there are some there. And I know of a fair amount of people growing pawpaws more in central and northern California, so around Sacramento and Stockton and San Jose and those areas, there are people growing pawpaws. So these are some issues that you might see with your trees. Nutrient deficiencies, we mostly just fertilize with nitrogen. Of course, you want to test your soil, and if you're deficient in anything, amend it or fertilize based on your soil test results. Generally, we just fertilize with nitrogen. In conventional orchards, we'll use urea, and organic orchards will use a bone feather blood meal. You can use fish emulsion. You can use a water soluble like Peters or Miracle-Gro, but they do like some nitrogen. You don't want to do it too late in the season. Let somebody in. You want to stop fertilizing at least by August 1st because they need to start shutting down for the fall. So you don't want to be encouraging a lot of vegetative growth late in the summer or into the fall. So as far as pruning pawpaw trees, they naturally want to grow kind of bushy with a lot of low branches. We did a study looking at pruning pawpaws to a central leader versus minimal pruning. And you see in the picture, the one on the left is pruned to a central leader. The tree on the right in the photo is what we called minimal pruning, which was basically no pruning, only if there was branches that were, you know, crossing and rubbing against each other or really bad that needed to be removed, did we prune them. Otherwise, they were pretty much not pruned. And honestly, it's kind of personal preference as far as what you like both appearance wise and what's more functional for you. The trees pruned to a central leader were stronger because you're selecting these strong scaffold branches with good angles. They were easier to harvest from. You could just see the fruit easier and get to the fruit easier. And we thought that opening them up like that we might have problems with sunburn, but that actually was not a problem. We didn't see sunburn on the fruit. They were a little bit slower to come into production and had lower, slightly lower yields, but it was just because you're removing some of the wood that would be fruiting. So there's a lot fewer branches on that tree were really the only reasons. I said more labor, which really means more labor pruning. It was a little bit less labor harvesting because it's just easier to see them and pick them. So some people like the appearance of the lower branches and the more bushy trees. As far as managing the orchard, it's a lot easier to mow and weed eat around the trees that are pruned to a central leader. So this is something that we see in Kentucky, and I assume it would be a problem there also, is southwest injury or sun scald in the wintertime. So in the winter, when the trees are dormant, it's cold, the trees have gone dormant, the sun shines strongest on the southwest side of the tree, of course, and then the bark being dark absorbs the heat and it heats up on that side and kind of dehardens it and gets the sap flowing. Then it gets cold again and it's kind of a freeze thaw cycle, and we end up seeing cracking on the trunk like you see on the lower left-hand side. So painting the trunks white with its mix of latex paint and water. It needs to be latex paint. You can't, oil-based paint would be toxic, so needs to be latex paint, but that reflects the heat and keeps it from absorbing the heat on that southwest side and prevents the trunk cracking. So we do that in our orchards because we actually had a lot of problems with the trunks cracking on the southwest side. This is the main fungal disease that we see, and it's getting to the point now we are looking at fungicides to control it. At first, it wasn't as bad. I think having a monoculture, we have a big orchard and it's kind of built up inoculum and developed more over the years. You probably would not see this much out there having a drier climate and not having as many pawpaws in close proximity, but especially your dry climate, because fungal diseases need leaf wetness in order to spread and proliferate. But this is the main disease that we see in pawpaws. It's this fungal, both leaf and fruit spot. Usually it's just cosmetic. So the fruit at the bottom center, you see the black spots on the fruit. It's fine on the inside. So that's just on the skin. If you cut it open, it doesn't cause any kind of rot. It's fine on the inside. The problem happens, you see the fruit that's on the right that's has severe infection of it and is cracked. So when you get a really severe case of it, the skin gets kind of brittle and doesn't expand right when the fruit grows and can cause the fruit to crack. So we are looking at sulfur and copper to control it. We've had one looking at that so far. Unfortunately, neither of them looked like they worked very well. So we included a conventional fungicide this year to compare it to. But again, you probably would not see that much out there. This is another pest that we occasionally see. It's a type of webworm, the Asimina webworm, that basically just kind of like a fall webworm, tent caterpillar, just kind of forms this webbing nest at the end of branches. For the most part, you could use BT or things like that to control it, but usually there's just a few of them and you can just cut it out and remove it and destroy the nest if you have these. This is something else that we see occasionally, the pawpaw peduncle borer. And it has that name. The peduncle is the little stem that attaches, the flower is attached to the tree with. And that's where it was first found, was burrowing into that little stem of the flowers, and that would make the flowers shrivel up and drop off without setting fruit. But it apparently likes pretty much all parts of the pawpaw because we have seen it in the fruit. You see the frass and the fruit on the left, and they will burrow into the twigs also. The good thing is they're not in very many fruit. We have have done studies and counted a few years, and they are in 3 to 5% of the fruit. So that's not enough that would warrant any kind of spraying or anything like that. But you do want to look out, you know, if you see frass on the outside of fruit, to know that there's a larva inside, but there are not very many of them. We do try to be careful sending cyanwood out to nurseries that we work with. We don't want to send this anywhere, send it to California where you probably don't have it yet. So since it burrows into the twigs too, that's something we have to be careful of. There is a sphinx caterpillar, the Pawpaw sphinx moth, that looks kind of like a tobacco hornworm, a hornworm type caterpillar. We don't often see this. It's not a major pest at all. It's just something we see occasionally. Japanese beetles will feed on pawpaw foliage somewhat. They don't like it nearly as much as they like grapes and plums and cherries and blackberries and other crops like that that they prefer. So Japanese beetles, they will eat foliage somewhat in the tops of the trees. They don't defoliate the trees or skeletonize them. We've never sprayed for them. So it's not a major pest, but something that you may see a few of. And the zebra swallowtail butterfly, I'll show some photos of, but unfortunately, again, you wouldn't see it out there because it's really in the eastern US, it's really where there's a native range of pawpaw. But it is a really nice black and white swallowtail. And again, has an exclusive relationship with pawpaw. So pawpaw is the only plant that the larvae of this butterfly feed on. So a lot of people that plant butterfly gardens plant pawpaws in their butterfly gardens in order to attract this butterfly. So we do have raccoons, possums, groundhogs, animals like that do like to eat pawpaws. They mostly, at least in our orchards, they will mostly just eat dropped fruit on the ground. But in some situations, they'll even climb trees to get to fruit if there's not a lot of food for them. I think they would go after the fruit a little bit more. I don't know that you all have a lot of deer out there, but deer here are usually a big problem, but they don't seem to prefer pawpaw. So pawpaw is not a preferred source for deer. They do like to rub on them, rub their antlers on them. So admitting, I think there's several people admitting. Okay, I have control of the screen. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So let's move on. Okay, if you want to grow pawpaws from seed, it's hard to get back after all that. You can produce them from seed. So when you remove the seed from the fruit, they do need to be stratified. They do need to be kept in the refrigerator for at least 3 months, and which kind of mimics what they would get in the wintertime. So they need to be in like damp peat moss in the refrigerator for at least 3 months. And you cannot store them in the freezer. Freezing will kill the seeds. So a lot of pawpaws are produced in containers, in these deep containers, because they have a taproot. So a lot of nurseries will use these deep pots because they are hard to dig, plant in the field and then dig and sell bare root because of the taproot. So they are not true to type from seed. So you don't really know exactly what you're going to get from a seed. If they're from good parents, you're likely to have good quality fruit. If they are from, wild trees or trees that do not have very good fruit, then the seedlings are probably going to be bad quality. And they do take a long time to produce fruit from seed. They take 7 to 8 years to produce fruit from seed. So these are what pawpaw seeds look like. If you grow cherimoya or you've eaten cherimoya, it looks similar to these. They're usually found either 1 or 2 rows inside the fruit. They're about the size and shape of a lima bean. So pawpaw seeds have alkaloid compounds that will make you throw up. They'll make you sick to your stomach if you eat them. So you don't want to eat them. You're not going to accidentally eat one though. They're so large and hard, you're not going to, accidentally chew up and eat a pawpaw seed. But if you're making like a smoothie or something like that, you don't want to accidentally get a seed from the fruit in the blender and grind it up because they will make you sick to your stomach. So to clonally produce pawpaw fruit or pawpaw trees, Unfortunately, Pawpaw is really difficult, pretty much impossible to root. So they can't be rooted by stem cuttings. Layering doesn't work very well. Can get a few to root through layering, but not very many. Tissue culture is very difficult. So what we do to propagate pawpaws clonally is we graft and bud onto seedling rootstock. So I think most of you all are pretty experienced plant growers. So you're familiar with grafting. That's just the process of clonally propagating the plant tree to type. So you take a cutting, take a piece off of the tree that you're wanting to propagate, and that's a scion grafted onto the rootstock, which in the case of Pawpaw is a seedling rootstock. We don't have clonal rootstocks. And budding, just using a single bud to graft with. So most methods of grafting will work with Pawpaw. Chip budding, whip and tongue grafting are the two that we use most commonly. Bark inlay grafting, cleft graft, saddle graft, all work with Pawpaw. The only one that does not work well with Pawpaw is tea budding. So for whatever reason, tea budding does not work well with Pawpaw. So we graft or bud onto seedling rootstocks, either in containers. So sometimes we do it in containers in the greenhouse. It can be done directly in the field. You can top work larger trees that you already have growing with bark inlay grafts. So especially if you have seedlings that don't produce very good fruit or wild type trees that don't have good fruit, once they start producing and you see, oh, this does not have the best fruit, you can cut them down to bark inlay grafts. So grafted trees take 3 to 4 years to produce fruit as opposed to seedlings that take 7 or 8 years. If you're not a very experienced grafter, you can use these tools, these grafting tools, and those work pretty well with pawpaws. So you can use these. That's kind of easy for beginners that have not done much grafting before. Whip and tongue grafts work well with pawpaw. So you can use that method. Chip budding. So these are the main two, whip and tongue and chip budding are the two that we use most commonly with pawpaw. And again, we've done the bark inlay grafts with larger trees in the field that are about 2-inch diameter. The thing with these is they do need to be staked, so the graft union is somewhat weak. You see on the bottom right, it heals up pretty well and kind of closes around that trunk, but not entirely in some cases, depending on how big diameter the rootstock is. So they do need to be staked or they are going to be prone to breaking. So pawpaw cultivars, again, they're not true to type from seed, and you don't know what you're going to get with seedlings. If they have good parentage, you're likely to have decent fruit from seedlings. You can have good seedling fruit or good wild fruit, but just from a random wild tree, it's not as likely to have good fruit from them. Seedlings do take longer to flower and fruit than grafted trees. So we'll go through these, show some pictures, but that's the list of recommended cultivars. And again, we've done some breeding at KSU. So KSU Atwood, KSU Benson, and KSU Chappelle are the cultivars that we have bred at KSU. Sunflower, Overlease, and NC1 are some older varieties that have good fruit. And we mentioned Neil Peterson earlier. Susquehanna, Potomac, Wabash, and Shenandoah are some of Neil Peterson's breeding efforts of newer pawpaw varieties. And I added mango. Mango was selected in Georgia, so it's more likely to be a lower chill cultivar since it was selected in Georgia. So that may be a good choice for you in California for your low chill areas. And somebody earlier mentioned Sweet Alice, and we don't have Sweet Alice, but it apparently performs well in California. You said that Dave Wilson Nursery propagates and sells it. So it may be a little bit lower chill or just otherwise be well suited for California. Or for California, for Sweet Alice, that is. So KSU Atwood, this was our first release back in 2010. And it's somewhat late ripening in Kentucky, so here mid-September is when it ripens. It has kind of a mild mango flavor. KSU Benson was our second release. Benson is earlier ripening. So here in Kentucky, it ripens in late August. So when I say early and late ripening, that's somewhat relative. It's not as variable as like apples that you may have early ripening apples in summertime all the way through October. So really with Papaw, we're talking late August through late September, pretty much. So it's not quite as wide a window as peaches and apples. So Benson is on the earlier end, which is late August for us. It has a really round fruit. That's the unique thing about Benson. It has this round, kind of baseball size shape to it. KSU Chappelle is our most recent release. We released that in 2018. And it's more of a mid-season ripening, so it kind of fills in that gap. So early September here in Kentucky. It has a mild, kind of a banana pineapple flavor. It's very vigorous, has good yields. So this is probably my personal favorite of our three, but you know, all of them are good, but I do really like Chappelle. This is NC1. Again, this is some of the older from 70s, 80s, kind of that era. Not way back, not back in the 1918 contest, but a little bit older than the more recent releases. Overlease is unique, that has a melon flavor. So if you like cantaloupe and honeydew flavors like that, Overlease has kind of a melon flavor. It also has a round shape to the fruit. Sunflower is a very commonly grown pawpaw fruit. It was selected in Kansas. It has a very mild flavor, so a lot of people don't like the stronger pawpaw flavors, the yeah, kind of more intense flavors. Sunflower has a more mild banana-like flavor. Dr. Pomper calls them beginner's pawpaws, the ones that have a more mild flavor. So Potomac, this is one of Neil Peterson's. Peterson Pawpaws is his breeding business. It has really large fruits, good flavor. The only problem with this one, and probably because it gets so large, is it's somewhat prone to cracking. So you'd want to have just consistent irrigation, not go through like dry and wet periods to prevent fruit cracking. Shenandoah is another of those milder flavored pawpaws, the more mild banana flavored pawpaws. That's another of Neil Peterson's cultivars. Wabash is also has that round shape to the fruit, another of Neil's. And unfortunately, the only issue with it is it does have some fruit cracking issues. Susquehanna is another of the Peterson pawpaws. Has large fruit. It does not have as many fruit per tree. The yields are a little bit lower. So you see in our trials, it had an average of 39 fruit per tree as opposed to the others that were more, you know, 60, 70, 80 range. So has a little bit lower yields. It has really good flavor. When we have done taste tests, Susquehanna has won quite a few times the taste tests that we've had and at the Ohio Pawpaw Festival. So Susquehanna is a really good one. People ask my personal favorites. I usually say KSU Chappelle and Susquehanna are my personal favorites, but obviously it's kind of, you know, just personal preference. Mango I wanted to include because again, it was selected in Georgia, and since it is from the Deep South, it's possibly low chill. And again, we're gonna be looking at that. It's very vigorous growing, has a tropical mango-like flavor. And again, we're doing breeding, so we're developing new cultivars. We've got variety trials going right now of new cultivars that are just numbered advanced selections right now being evaluated. So keep an eye out for them. They'll always have KSU in front of the name. So we have KSU Atwood, KSU Benson, KSU Chappelle. So anytime you see the pawpaw with KSU in the name, you know that it's one of ours. So when you harvest the fruit, unfortunately, it's hard to tell by appearance. The pawpaw skin is green, usually even when it's ripe. Sometimes they'll have a slight yellow color break, but generally it's green even when it's ripe. So two things that you can tell when they're ready to pick: they will start to get soft. Well, the first thing you'll probably see is they will drop off the tree. So if you see a tree with a couple of fruit on the ground underneath it, you know they're starting to get ripe. They will be soft. to the touch. You know, when you hand harvest, you'll be able to feel that they're soft, similar to a peach when they're getting ripe. And they also come off easily in your hand. If you have to twist it and yank it off the tree, then it's not ready to pick yet. But if you give it a little wiggle and it comes off in your hand, then it's ripe. They do bruise easily when they're ripe. So you want to handle it pretty gently. Don't stack them too deeply in your basket or box or whatever you're picking in. And we mentioned they flower over a long period of time. So they flower over at about a month-long period. And by the same token, a tree, you will harvest from an individual tree over about a 3-week period. And sometimes even one fruit and a cluster will be ripe and the rest of the fruit will not be ready to pick yet. So that makes it more challenging for commercial growers. Was probably good for backyard growers that you don't have all your fruit all at once. You're picking a few fruit a day over about a month-long period. So again, Kentucky, late August through late September is the harvest. In California, it's going to be, in warmer climates, that is, it's going to be a little bit earlier. So when they're ripe, they have a very short shelf life, so only a couple of days when fruit are ripe. You can pick pawpaws when they're just beginning to get soft. So they have to be beginning the ripening process. If they're rock hard, then they will not ripen off the tree. But if you feel them, you squeeze them, and they're beginning to get a little bit soft, you can go ahead and pick them, and they'll keep longer at that point. You can put them in the refrigerator for about 2 weeks and then let them ripen completely at room temperature. But if you want to store them longer, freezing is the best way to store them for long-term storage. So again, when you're eating pawpaw fruit, when you're processing it, you want to avoid bruises. Sometimes they get bitter flavors where the bruises are. This red or pink discoloration inside, we think is probably heat damage, kind of internal, either bruising or heat damage inside the fruit. And again, watch out for the peduncle borer larva. And the skin is not edible. It's not a thick skin that you can peel away easily like a banana. It's a thin skin that clings to the fruit, but it has bitter flavors, so you don't want to eat the skin. And again, the seeds are not edible, so you don't want to eat those. So if you only have a few fruit and you're wanting to freeze it, you can process it by hand. We used to use, basically cut the fruit in half and scoop out the insides and put it in a colander or in a mesh bag and push it through the colander or squeeze it through the mesh bag to remove the seeds and get a really nice kind of pureed pulp like that. It was labor intensive. You can do that if you have a few trees, but if you're doing it on a larger scale, obviously you want to do something different. So this is what we started using after we started processing and freezing more fruit, is this food mill. There's a few brands. There's Squeezo and Victorinox are some other brands. We've just bought this on Amazon. It's available different places. So what we used is the middle-sized screen. So it's called the pumpkin squash screen. And then that red spiral is the grape spiral, which is meant to remove grape seeds to make grape jelly. So obviously pawpaw seeds are a lot bigger than grape seeds. So you have to modify that. You have to cut off the end of that spiral, either cut off the end or file off the end so that it's big enough for the pawpaw seeds to pass through. So you still have the step of removing the skin. So either peel the skin or cut it in half, scoop out the insides, and you put that in the top and kind of push it through with that plunger and turn the crank, or there is a motor you can put on it too. And you see in that photo, the seeds come out one end and the pulp, pureed pulp, comes out the other end. And you can see there that there's a lot of pulp that adheres to the seeds, so you have to run it through 2 or 3 times to get as much of that off as possible. So that's kind of the mid-scale processing method. This is what we're using now that is faster. This is more of a commercial grade equipment. It's too expensive, too big for a homeowner. I think it was $2,000 or $3,000, I can't remember. But anyway, it's a commercial piece of equipment. It's not like a home kitchen type of equipment, but it's a pulp extractor / juicer. And it works actually kind of similar to this food mill in that you still have to peel it. Unfortunately, we don't have a good automated way of removing the skin or removing the peel. So you still have to either peel it or do the cut in half, scoop out the inside step. And it goes through the top. And there is kind of a tumbler inside that has a mesh screen that there's paddles that it tumbles around. And the pulp comes out one side, you see on the bottom right, and the seeds come out another chute. But you can see in that photo how much cleaner the seeds are from this machine than with this food mill. The seeds are coming out that side. So the seeds come out a lot cleaner. It's a lot faster. So for a commercial scale processor, you want to use something like this. Larger fruit are best for processing. Small fruit tend to be mostly seed, especially like a narrow fruit. A round fruit has a better proportion of fruit to seed than even if it's big. If it's narrow, then you've got that row of seeds down the middle and you don't get a lot of pulp out of it. So you can freeze it, store it in freezer bags for up to 2 years, thaw it just gently in the refrigerator. We don't add fruit fresh or citric acid or lemon juice or anything to it. We just freeze it as is. Then you can use it in ice cream, smoothies, jams, baked goods, things like that. So the nutritional composition of pawpaw, it's most similar to banana. You can see it's pretty comparable to banana in most categories. But you can see it's high in lots of vitamins, minerals. I highlighted red, the ones where it's the highest. So, but for the most part, it's similar to banana. So as far as markets for pawpaws, the fresh market, again, it's local and small scale since pawpaws can't be shipped very easily long distances. So farmers markets, local produce markets. I know of at least one place in California that's called Andy's Orchard that I think is up closer to the Bay Area, like the San Jose area, that sells pawpaw fruit. So not very close to you. There may be people closer, in Los Angeles that sell fruit, but that's just one that I'm aware of in California. So there are commercial growers and people selling there in your state. And it varies widely. This is more Kentucky numbers. $3 to $5 a pound retail, but I know places where pawpaws are less common. So Washington, D.C. area and New York City, there are some being sold at farmers markets that would go for higher prices. So it likely would in California also. Some people do mail order and online, even though, we were saying they don't ship very well, but if they're picked a little unripe and they're packaged well, they can be shipped on a small scale. And those, they generally sell for quite a bit more since they're shipping longer distances. But value-added products, and here in Kentucky, most of the pawpaws in the state are being bought by wineries and breweries and distilleries to make products, make beer and wine and brandy and products like that. So some products you can make with pawpaws. Pawpaw beer. There's people have made pawpaw sour ale. Seems like sours are the most common beer style to be made with pawpaws. Pawpaw wine, it makes a pretty sweet dessert wine. Brandy and moonshine. Moonshine's more of an Appalachian thing, but I know there's a place in West Virginia that makes pawpaw moonshine, but that's kind of a good tie-in to the Appalachian heritage for pawpaw. But again, that's where most of the pawpaw growers in Kentucky have sold the bulk of their crop to the wineries and breweries for the last few years. You can use pawpaw as a substitute for any recipe that calls for banana. You can substitute pawpaws in equal amounts to the banana. So banana bread, muffins, things like that. Makes really good like custard and creme brulee since the pawpaw fruit has a creamy texture anyway. So even though pawpaw is sweet, you can use it in some not sweet applications too. So salsas, like a mango salsa recipe, you could substitute pawpaw. There was this pawpaw hot sauce on the market from a company in Ohio, this pawpaw chipotle hot sauce. Pawpaw ice cream, and you can, I think this is being recorded, but you're welcome to take a picture or write down our recipe. That's a recipe for Papaw ice cream that we developed. Just a very basic recipe, doesn't have eggs or anything in it. But you can also just blend it with yogurt to make a smoothie, things like that. So I personally think that Pawpaw's best in applications where it's not cooked. So just eating it fresh or in ice cream, smoothies, things like that. When you bake it, even though you can bake it, again, the banana recipes, it loses a lot of the flavor. The flavor doesn't come through as much. So I really think the raw applications are better. And we have made a Pawpaw jam also. We developed this recipe. And again, a pretty basic recipe. We tried some that were more like apple butter that had a lot of spices and things like that. But this basic recipe that's just the Pawpaw and sugar and pectin turned out to be the best. So, and we are online in different capacities. We have a Facebook page. So if you have Facebook, you can search for KSU Pawpaw on Facebook and follow us there. And we will post any kind of upcoming events and kind of news about what we're doing. And we have a website, which I think, and John told me this before, I think that this is the old address. I think now it's, no, this is right, kysu.edu/pawpaw. It was pawpaw.kysu.edu, and then they switched it around on us, but that is the correct one there. And I do want to mention, so at KSU, we have something that's called the Third Thursday thing, that the third Thursday of every month, we have sustainable agriculture workshops on different topics. So September is horticulture, which is mostly Pawpaw. So that's September 17th. And it's going to be on Facebook Live. And it should be linked through our KSU Pawpaw page. It's mostly through KSU land grant page, which is like our whole college, but they'll link it to the KSU Pawpaw page. So we'll have orchard tours and some, more talks, probably a similar talk to what I gave, but then some other ones too on that September 3rd Thursday thing. So that is all I have, but I would be glad to, whoops, that went back to the beginning. I'd be glad to answer any questions that anybody has. And sorry about the invaders. I tried to get them out as fast as I could. But yeah, I'd be glad to, you can unmute and I'll take any questions you have.
Hi, Sheri. This is Tim Levenberg. I'm in the North San Diego chapter of the Rare Fruit Growers.
Yes.
I have 3 comments and a quick question. One, I thought it was a great presentation, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'll put my video on here. It was a great presentation. And 2, I thought you handled the invader very well. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I was just kind of, yeah.
3, for our local California folk, that Roma processor, I have one of the tomato mills with the fine mesh, does a phenomenal job at juicing passion fruit. We have hundreds and hundreds of passion fruit, and that's all I do. I cut them in half, scoop them out, put them in there, run them through a few times, and you get amazing nectar from passion fruit, which are in beautiful season right now. But my question is, can you graft a pawpaw onto a cherimoya? I have a cherimoya tree that is a pain in the neck to pollinate.
Yeah.
My as the pollination for it, but it's can you graft onto that?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, you can't. They're not compatible. It has been attempted, and I think they sometimes they don't take it all, but sometimes they'll live for a year and then die. So they're not really compatible. They're different genus, obviously. So sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, unfortunately with cherimoya, it doesn't. The people that have tried it, it will either not take or it'll live for a year or 2 at the most and then die. So unfortunately you can't. You could onto other Asimina species. So if you had one of those shrubby, like Florida Asimina species, then that would work. But yeah, not onto a Nona.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks.
I have a question on the fungus. Would using a Bordeaux powder probably be a good cure instead of like copper sulfate or something like that?
Yeah, that would be something to look at. So yeah, that would be, Yeah, likely to work. We didn't see any toxicity with the copper or the sulfur that we have used. Um, so yeah, we have not looked at that, but that would be something that would be fairly likely to be promising. There's some questions in chat. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You had mentioned that there was a possibility that one of the varieties, mango, was possibly low chill. Does that mean that all of the other varieties do need more chill? About how many chill hours does a papaya tree need? Let me ask it that way.
Yeah. Papa, well, we need to determine that more. So we don't know exactly. We actually have a graduate student working on that right now. And we always say 400 hours as an estimate, but I think it's likely, again, we know of people growing them in Los Angeles and places, I think get more like 200, 150, 200.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably lower in at least some varieties than is reported at 400. But I assume that it's going to be like peaches and apples, that there's some low chill and some higher chill. That we've got a graduate student that's working on it right now. So, but again, there's some, we know people have them in Los Angeles and some in San Diego, which I think Dave